I'll be honest. The night I found my best friend sitting in my kitchen at 2:13 in the morning, wearing my dead mother's pearl earrings and drinking from the coffee mug my son painted for Mother's Day. I finally understood that some people do not break into your life with violence because they wait until you lovingly hand them the key. My name is Claire Whitman. I was 38 years old then, and I lived in a quiet suburb outside Nashville, in a small rental house with white shutters, a leaking kitchen faucet, and just enough peace to make me believe I had survived the worst season of my life. 2 years earlier, my marriage had ended after my ex-husband drained our savings, lied about credit cards, and left me with a stack of bills that made my hands shake every time I opened the mailbox. So when I finally rebuilt something steady for myself and my 9-year-old daughter, Lily, I protected it like a woman who knew exactly how quickly safety could disappear. That was why I should have been more careful when Megan came back into my life. But loneliness has a strange way of making red flags look like warmth, and after months of coming home to a silent house, I let myself believe that an old friendship arriving at the perfect time was a blessing instead of a warning. Megan and I had been close in our 20s, back when we both worked at a hotel downtown and spent our lunch breaks sharing fries, complaints, and dreams that sounded much bigger than our paychecks. But after I got married and she bounced between jobs, cities, and men who always seemed to misunderstand her, we drifted apart in that soft, ordinary way people do. Then, one Friday afternoon in October, she messaged me out of nowhere. "Claire, I know this is random, but I really need a friend." That was all she wrote, and maybe a stronger woman would have waited before answering or asked more questions, or remembered how Megan always seemed to appear when her life was burning. But I looked at that message while sitting alone in my car outside Lily's school, and something inside me softened before my common sense could speak. By the next evening, Megan was sitting across from me at a diner near the interstate, crying into a paper napkin while telling me that her boyfriend had kicked her out. Her boss had cut her hours. Her family had turned cold. And she had nowhere to go except a weekly motel that smelled like cigarettes and fear. She looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under her eyes and a tremble in her voice that made every protective instinct in me rise up. And when she reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "You were always the only person who really saw me," I felt something dangerous happen inside my chest. I felt needed. That feeling can become a trap when you have spent years feeling unwanted, and Megan must have known it, because she never asked to move in directly, not at first, not in the obvious way that would have allowed me to say no. Instead, she asked if she could stay just one night because she had an early interview nearby, then just through the weekend because her paycheck had not cleared, then just until Friday because she was waiting on a room with a woman from Facebook Marketplace. And every time the deadline came, there was a new disaster wrapped in tears. At first, Lily loved her. Megan brought cheap nail polish, told funny stories, made pancakes shaped like hearts, and laughed loudly at every little thing my daughter said, which felt harmless until I noticed that Lily started asking why I was not fun like Aunt Megan, and why I always cared so much about bills, rules, bedtime, and vegetables. I told myself not to be jealous of a woman who was struggling, because that sounded ugly and small, but I could feel the balance in my house shifting in ways I could not explain without sounding cruel. Megan borrowed my sweaters without asking, used my shampoo until the bottles were empty, left coffee rings on my bills, and somehow managed to turn every small correction into a wound I had caused her. If I asked her not to smoke on the back porch because Lily had asthma, she would stare down at her hands and say, "I forgot how hard it is to be around people who think the worst of me." If I reminded her to lock the front door, she would laugh softly and say, "You're so anxious, Claire, but I get it. Your marriage really did a number on you." And if I ever looked tired or annoyed, she would suddenly become fragile, quiet, and wounded, moving through my house like a guest who had been deeply insulted by basic boundaries. The first time she asked to borrow money, it was only $80. She needed gas, she said, because she had a job interview at a dental office across town, and she promised she would pay me back by Tuesday, looking so embarrassed and hopeful that I actually apologized while handing her the cash. Tuesday came, then Friday, then the next week, and somehow the $80 became groceries, a phone bill, a replacement tire, and a temporary charge on my credit card because her bank had frozen her account for reasons she described so dramatically that I felt guilty for not understanding. By Thanksgiving, Megan had been living with us for 6 weeks, though she still called it crashing for a minute, and my house no longer felt like mine. She knew my work schedule, my daughter's routines, the passcode to my garage, the drawer where I kept emergency cash, and the way to make me feel selfish whenever I hesitated. Still, the moment that should have woken me up happened on a rainy Tuesday night, when I came home early from work with a migraine and found Megan in my bedroom, sitting cross-legged on my bed, holding the small wooden box where I kept my mother's jewelry. She smiled too quickly when she saw me. "Oh, Claire," she said, closing the box with one hand. "I was just looking for a safety pin." I stood in the doorway with my wet coat still dripping onto the carpet, staring at the box, then at her face, then at the pearl earrings in her palm, and a cold, quiet thought moved through me so slowly that I almost missed it. She was not embarrassed because I caught her. She was annoyed because I came home early. I did not confront Megan that night, and that is the part one still hate admitting, because I saw the pearl earrings in her hand. I saw the little flash of irritation behind her smile, and still I let her explain it away because the truth felt too ugly to touch. She stood up slowly, placed the earrings back into my mother's wooden box, and gave me the soft, wounded look that made me feel like I had walked in on her grief instead of my own violation. "I'm sorry," she said, almost whispering. "I just miss having pretty things around me, and I guess I forgot what it feels like to be trusted." That sentence landed exactly where she aimed it, because trust had always been the thing I wanted to prove I still had after my divorce. And instead of asking why she was digging through my private things in my bedroom, I found myself telling her it was okay. But it was not okay. Nothing felt okay after that. The next morning, I noticed my emergency cash envelope was thinner than it should have been. But because I had been tired, stressed, and juggling too many bills, I convinced myself I had probably used some of it for groceries and forgotten. Then my favorite black cardigan disappeared from the laundry room, and Megan wore it 3 days later with a little shrug, saying, "I thought you said I could borrow clothes," even though I had never said that. After that, small things started moving around the house in ways that made me feel like I was losing my mind. A bottle of perfume I used only on Sundays was suddenly half empty. Lily's school fundraiser money went missing from the kitchen counter, and my debit card was not in my wallet one morning, then reappeared 2 hours later under a stack of mail I had already checked twice. Every time I almost said something, Megan gave me a reason not to. She had a headache. She had a panic attack. She had spoken to her mother and cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes. She had a new interview, a new disappointment, a new cruel person who had judged her, abandoned her, misunderstood her, or made her feel worthless. And slowly, without ever saying the words, she made my house revolve around her pain. Lily started changing too, and that scared me more than the missing money. My daughter became secretive in a way she had never been before, closing her bedroom door when Megan walked in, hiding her drawings, and asking me one evening in a tiny voice whether adults could be nice in front of people and mean when no one else was around. I froze with a dish towel in my hands. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Lily looked toward the hallway, lowered her voice, and said, "Nothing. Aunt Megan just says you get overwhelmed, and I shouldn't make things harder for you." For a second, I could not breathe, because that was not a stolen sweater, or a borrowed lipstick, or a sad woman crossing a line she did not understand. That was my child learning to carry silence for someone else. I asked Lily if Megan had scared her, and she shook her head too quickly, the way children do when they are trying to protect peace they should never have been responsible for protecting. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I found Megan sitting on the back porch with a glass of my wine, wrapped in my robe, looking out at the rain like she was the lonely heroine in a movie only she could see. I wanted to ask her what she had said to my daughter. I wanted to tell her that my home was not a shelter for her chaos. But before I could speak, she turned with red eyes and said, "Claire, I think Lily is starting to resent me because you're tense all the time." The cruelty of it was so smooth that I almost missed it. She did not accuse me loudly. She did not attack me directly. She simply placed the problem in my hands and watched me decide whether I was brave enough to put it back where it belonged. I was not brave enough yet, so I apologized again, and every apology made the trap tighter. A few days later, my bank app sent me a notification while I was standing in line at the pharmacy, waiting to pick up Lily's inhaler. $176 had been charged at a beauty supply store 30 minutes away. I stared at the screen, confused at first, then cold all over, because the card used was my backup credit card, the one I kept in the locked drawer of my nightstand. The drawer Megan had been near when I found her with my mother's jewelry. I drove home with my hands clenched around the steering wheel, rehearsing what I would say, promising myself I would not soften, would not apologize, would not let tears turn theft into tragedy. But when I walked through the front door, Megan was already crying on the couch. Her suitcase was open beside her. Her phone was in her lap. And my backup credit card was sitting on the coffee table like evidence she had staged before I arrived. "I was going to tell you," she said, her voice shaking beautifully, "but I knew you would look at me like everyone else does." Then she told me a story about desperation, humiliation, and needing to look presentable for an interview that could change everything, and somehow she made the stolen charge sound like a test of my compassion. I stood there, listening, with my coat still on and Lily's inhaler in my purse, and for the first time since Megan had moved in, I heard another voice inside me. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. She is not asking for forgiveness. She is asking for permission to do it again. I told her she needed to pay me back by Friday and start looking for another place immediately, and the second those words left my mouth, her crying stopped so fast that my stomach turned. Her face changed. The helplessness disappeared. Something colder looked back at me. Then she smiled a little and said, "Claire, before you make me your enemy, you should really think about what I know." The way Megan said those words made my whole body go still, because she was no longer the broken woman on my couch who needed shelter. She was a stranger wearing my friendship like a mask. And for the first time I understood that she had not been living in my house as a guest. She had been studying me. She knew I worried about money. She knew I feared another custody fight. She knew I still felt ashamed that my divorce had left me financially fragile. And she knew exactly which buttons to press when she wanted me scared, guilty, or silent. I asked her what she meant, but my voice came out much smaller than I wanted, and Megan tilted her head like she was disappointed in me for pretending we were still having a normal conversation. "Oh, Claire," she said softly, "you really don't want to turn this into something ugly." That was all she gave me. No explanation. No direct threat. Just enough poison to make my mind run through every private thing she had seen, every tired confession I had made, every moment when I had let loneliness convince me that honesty with the wrong person was the same thing as intimacy. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the house felt sharpened. Every creak in the hallway made me open my eyes, and when I heard Megan moving around the kitchen at almost midnight, I stayed frozen beneath my blanket, listening to cabinets open and close like she had every right to search through the life I had built. The next morning, she acted cheerful. That was somehow worse. She made coffee, packed Lily's lunch, hummed along to a country song on the radio, and smiled at me like the night before had never happened, which made me feel trapped in a version of reality where I was the only one still carrying the threat. At work, I could not focus on anything. I misfiled 2 patient forms, forgot to return a call from an insurance company, and stared at my computer screen while my supervisor, Denise, asked if everything was okay in that careful voice people use when they already know something is not. I wanted to tell her. I almost did. But then my phone buzzed with a text from Megan. A picture appeared first. It was Lily walking into school, wearing her purple backpack, completely unaware that Megan had taken the photo from across the parking lot. Under it, Megan wrote, "She looked nervous this morning." Poor thing. Kids feel tension more than adults realize. My hands went cold so fast I nearly dropped the phone. There was no open thread in the message, nothing I could show someone and say, "Look, this woman is dangerous." But the meaning was sitting there, quiet and deliberate, like a knife laid gently on the table. She wanted me to know she could get close to my daughter. She wanted me to know she was willing to use that. When I got home, Megan was sitting with Lily at the kitchen table, helping her with math homework and laughing like the sweetest aunt in the world. But Lily's eyes lifted to mine for one quick second, and I saw fear there before she looked back down at her worksheet. That tiny look broke something in me. Not loudly, not completely, but enough. After dinner, I told Megan I needed the house quiet because Lily had school, and for once I did not apologize when I said it. But Megan simply leaned against the counter and watched me with that calm, measuring expression that made my skin crawl. You know, she said, I've been thinking about how hard it must be for you to do everything alone. I did not answer. She continued anyway. With your ex and the money, and all those nights you leave Lily with neighbors when the clinic needs you late. I turned slowly. I had left Lily with my neighbor Mrs. Alvarez twice, both times for paid overtime, both times completely safe. But the way Megan said it made normal survival sound like neglect. Then she smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but with the confidence of someone who had found a weapon. People misunderstand things when they don't know the full story. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I searched through my financial accounts with a kind of desperate focus, and what I found made my stomach twist so hard I had to sit down on the bathroom floor. There were charges I had missed. Small ones at first. $9 at a gas station. $23 at a drive-thru. $48 at a clothing store. Nothing dramatic enough to scream theft, but together they formed a pattern, and the pattern stretched back almost 3 weeks. Megan had not made one desperate mistake. She had been testing what she could get away with. I canceled the backup card immediately, changed my banking passwords, and moved my emergency cash into a locked file box I hid in the garage beneath old Christmas decorations. But the whole time I worked, I felt foolish in a way that hurt more than anger. Because I had invited this into my home. I had made space for it. I had taught my daughter, without meaning to, that kindness meant tolerating someone who made you afraid. The next day, I called my landlord during lunch and asked whether I could change the locks, explaining that a temporary guest had overstayed and I needed to resecure the house. He was quiet for a moment, then asked a question that made the floor seem to shift beneath my feet. Claire, is this about the second adult listed on the updated occupancy form? I gripped the phone tighter. What updated form? He sounded uncomfortable then, like he had realized something was wrong, and told me that a woman named Megan Ellis had emailed his office the week before with a signed document stating she was now living in the home as an approved co-tenant. A signed document, with my name on it. I do not remember ending the call, but I remember walking into the clinic bathroom, locking the stall, and pressing my fist against my mouth so no one would hear me panic. This was not freeloading anymore. This was not borrowed money or emotional manipulation. This was something planned. Something legal-looking. Something that could make it harder to remove her from my house. When I got home, Megan was gone, but her suitcase was still in the guest room. Her makeup covered the bathroom counter, and a new key sat on the entry table with a bright pink keychain I had never seen before. I stood there staring at it, understanding that she had already made a copy. Then I heard Lily call my name from her bedroom, and when I walked in, she was sitting on the edge of her bed, holding the old iPad I let her use for games on weekends. Her face looked pale. "Mom," she whispered, "why is Aunt Megan texting Dad?" My heart stopped. I took the iPad from her hands and saw a message thread opened under Megan's name. But the number at the top belonged to my ex-husband, Jason, the man who had lied to me, emptied our savings, and disappeared whenever responsibility got too heavy. The last message from Megan had been sent that morning. "She's close to kicking me out, but don't worry. I know exactly how to make her look unstable." And Jason had replied with 7 words that made the room tilt. "Good. I'll be there tomorrow morning." I did not sleep that night, because once you read a message saying your ex-husband is coming to your house with the woman who has been stealing from you, threatening you, and slowly turning your own child into a witness against your peace, sleep becomes something that belongs to safer people. I sat on the edge of Lily's bed until she drifted off, holding her small hand while my mind raced through every possible disaster, because Jason was not just an ex-husband who had disappointed me. He was charming when he needed something. He was calm when he was lying. And he knew how to walk into a room, make himself sound reasonable, and leave me looking emotional, exhausted, and impossible to trust. That had been his gift during our marriage. He could break a plate, hide a bill, empty an account, disappear for 2 days, then look at me with tired eyes and ask why I always had to make everything so dramatic. Now Megan had found him. Or maybe he had found her. Either way, two people who knew my softest places had started comparing notes, and the thought made my skin feel too tight for my body. At 5:40 in the morning, I made coffee I could not drink, took pictures of the message thread on Lily's iPad, photographed the strange key on the entry table, and gathered screenshots of every suspicious charge I could find. Because fear had finally become something sharper than panic. It became direction. I called Denise before the clinic opened and told her I had a family emergency, but before she could ask questions, my voice cracked in a way I hated, and I ended up telling her more than I planned. Not everything, just enough. The fake occupancy form, the missing money, the threatening texts, the picture of Lily outside school, and the message to Jason about making me look unstable. Denise went quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Claire, stop trying to handle this like a misunderstanding." Those words hit me harder than any insult Megan had thrown at me, because I realized I had still been searching for the gentlest way out, still hoping there was a version of this where nobody got angry, nobody felt betrayed, and nobody had to admit that I had let danger sleep in my guest room. Denise told me to call the police non-emergency line, then call my landlord again, then call a lawyer if I could, and for once I did not argue with help just because needing it made me feel embarrassed. By 7:15, I had left Lily with Mrs. Alvarez next door, after telling her only that Megan was not allowed to pick Lily up from school or enter her house under any circumstances. And the older woman looked at me with the kind of seriousness that made me feel less alone. At 8:03, Jason pulled into my driveway in the same silver pickup he had once claimed he needed for work opportunities, even though the payments had nearly buried us and Megan stepped out of the passenger seat wearing my black cardigan. That detail almost broke me, not because of the cardigan itself, because of the message. She wanted me to see that she could take something from me, stand in front of me wearing it, and still expect me to question whether I had any right to be angry. Jason knocked once, then opened the door with Megan's copied key before I could reach it. The sound of that key turning in my lock will stay with me for the rest of my life. It was not loud. It was not violent. But it was the sound of every boundary I had ignored finally collapsing at the same time. Jason walked in first, scanning the room like he was inspecting property that might soon belong to him, while Megan lingered behind him with her arms crossed and a soft, injured expression prepared for whatever audience might appear. "Claire," Jason said, in that calm courtroom voice he used whenever he wanted to sound like the adult, "Megan told me things have been getting pretty bad here." I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because the sentence was so perfectly cruel that my body had no other place to put it. "You need to leave," I said. Megan looked down immediately, as if I had slapped her. Jason sighed. And that sigh, more than anything else, dragged me back into my marriage, into all those nights when he made my fear sound like instability and my anger sound like proof that I was the problem. "We're concerned about Lily," he said. That was when I understood the plan. Not completely, but enough. Megan had not only been stealing money. She had not only been threatening me. She had been building a story, piece by piece, where I was overwhelmed, anxious, financially stressed, emotionally unstable, and unsafe for my own daughter. My knees went weak, but I stayed standing. Jason said Megan had agreed to be a neutral witness if he needed to revisit custody, because she had been living in my house and had apparently seen concerning behavior. Megan wiped at her eye, though no tear had fallen. Then she said, "I didn't want to get involved, Claire, but Lily deserves stability." For 1 second, the room went strangely silent, and I looked from Megan to Jason, then to the cardigan on her shoulders, then to the copied key in his hand, and the truth opened in front of me so wide I could barely breathe. This was not friendship gone wrong. This was not one desperate woman taking advantage of my kindness. This was just insanity. They were trying to take my peace, my money, my home, and maybe even my child, and somehow they expected me to stand there grateful that they had called it concern. But the part they had miscalculated was simple. I was not alone anymore. Before Jason could continue, there was a knock at the open door, and my landlord, Mr. Peterson, stepped onto the porch with 2 police officers beside him. Megan's face changed first. It was small, almost invisible, but I saw the fear crack through her performance before she could cover it. Mr. Peterson looked at me, then at Jason, then at Megan. I came because Claire reported a forged occupancy document, he said, holding a folder in his hand. Jason's jaw tightened. Megan started talking too fast. She said it was a misunderstanding, then said I had agreed verbally, then said she was under stress, then said I had become hostile, and every new explanation contradicted the one before it. One officer asked Jason why he had entered the home with a key that did not belong to him. Jason looked at Megan. Megan looked at the floor. That tiny exchange told me everything. For the first time in weeks, the room did not bend around her version of events. The officer asked me if I wanted Megan removed from the property, and my voice shook so badly I barely recognized it, but I still said yes. Megan turned toward me then, and the softness was gone. You'll regret this, she said, low enough that only I could hear. But the younger officer heard it too. He looked at her and said, Ma'am, that is not helping you. While they walked her to the guest room to collect her things, I stood by the kitchen counter and watched Jason's confidence drain out of him, because without Megan's performance filling the room, he looked exactly like what he was. A man hoping someone else's lie could reopen a door he had already slammed shut. He leaned closer and whispered, You're making a mistake. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since our divorce, I did not feel smaller. No, I said quietly. I made the mistake when I kept letting people scare me into silence. Megan came out carrying 2 bags, but as she passed the hallway table, something slipped from the pocket of my cardigan and hit the floor with a hard little crack. My mother's pearl earrings. Everyone saw them. Megan froze. And in that single, terrible second, I realized the earrings were not the worst thing she had taken. The pearl earrings lay on the hardwood floor between Megan's shoes and mine, glowing under the hallway light like 2 tiny pieces of evidence from a life she had never earned the right to touch. And for a moment nobody moved, because even Jason, with all his talent for twisting a room, could not explain why my mother's jewelry had fallen from the pocket of a woman claiming she was only there to protect my daughter. Megan reached down too quickly, but the older officer stepped forward and told her not to touch them, and the sound of his voice made something inside me loosen, because for weeks I had been the only person in that house treating her behavior like reality. She gave them to me, Megan said suddenly, turning toward the officers with wide eyes and trembling lips. Claire told me I could wear them for good luck, because she knew how important my interview was. I almost answered immediately, almost threw my whole anger into the room, but then I saw what she was doing. She wanted speed. She wanted noise. She wanted me shaking, crying, defending, over-explaining, and looking exactly like the unstable woman she and Jason had been trying to create. So I took one slow breath, then another, and I said, as calmly as I could, those earrings belong to my mother, and I never gave Megan permission to touch them. Megan stared at me with pure hatred hiding behind tears. Jason shifted near the door. The officer asked whether I had any proof that the earrings were mine, and for one terrifying second my mind went blank, because grief has a way of preserving feelings better than paperwork, and my mother had been gone for 6 years, leaving me only a small box of jewelry, a few recipes written in blue ink, and the kind of ache that never fully leaves the room. Then I remembered the photo. It was in the living room, on the bookshelf beside Lily's school pictures, the framed photograph from my wedding day where my mother stood behind me in a navy dress, smiling with those same pearl earrings catching the light beneath her silver hair. I crossed the room, lifted the frame with both hands, and brought it back without looking at Jason, because I could feel his eyes on me, waiting for one crack, one hesitation, one opening where he could slide himself back into control. The officer compared the photo to the earrings, then looked at Megan. Her crying changed then. It became louder, messier, almost theatrical, but beneath it I could hear panic. She said she was confused. She said she was under emotional pressure. She said I had been cruel to her for weeks, making her feel like a burden, making her feel unwelcome, making her feel desperate enough to make bad choices. Bad choices. That was the phrase she used. Not theft. Not forgery. Not threats involving my child. Just bad choices, as if she had eaten the last slice of cake instead of slipping herself into my lease, draining my money, contacting my ex-husband, and carrying my dead mother's earrings out of my house inside my own cardigan. The younger officer asked whether I wanted to file a report for the missing money and the jewelry, and my throat tightened around the answer, because saying yes felt like crossing a bridge I could never uncross. For years, I had been trained by marriage, shame, and exhaustion to choose the quiet option. The option that avoided scenes. The option that let other people leave comfortably while I stayed behind, cleaning up the damage. But Lily was across the street at Mrs. Alvarez's house, probably sitting at the kitchen table with a juice box, trusting that I would finally make our home safe again, and that thought reached deeper than fear. Yes, I said. I want to file a report. Megan stopped crying. Just stopped. Her face went flat in a way that chilled me more than her tears ever had, and for a second I saw the woman underneath everything, not wounded, not helpless, not misunderstood, but furious that the story was no longer obeying her. Jason tried one last time. He told the officers this was a domestic misunderstanding, told them I had a history of anxiety after the divorce, told them he was only there because he cared about his daughter's emotional environment, and as he spoke, I watched him become smaller with every word, because the calm voice that used to terrify me now sounded rehearsed, thin, and almost desperate. Then Mr. Peterson opened his folder. Inside was the forged occupancy form. He explained that the signature did not match the one on my lease, that the email had come from an address using my name, but not my actual account, and that his office had security logs showing the document had been submitted from an IP address connected to a public library near the motel where Megan claimed she had stayed before moving in. Megan's head snapped toward him. That one movement told the officers more than her denials ever could. The older officer asked Megan whether she had created the email account. She said no. He asked whether she had signed my name. She said she did not remember. He asked whether she had given Jason a key to my home. She looked at Jason. Jason looked away. That was the moment I realized toxic people are loyal only while the lie benefits both of them, and the second consequence enters the room, they start silently choosing who will drown first. Within 20 minutes, Megan was outside on the porch with her bags, shaking with anger while the officers explained that she could not return without permission. And Jason was warned that using a copy key to enter my home again would create a much bigger problem than whatever custody story he had been planning. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt hollow. Because when the patrol car pulled away and Jason backed out of the driveway without looking at me, and Megan stood at the curb glaring from beneath the hood of my cardigan until one officer told her to remove it, I finally saw the real shape of what had happened. She had not only stolen money, she had stolen the feeling of safety from every room. The house looked the same after they left, but it did not feel the same because her perfume still hung in the hallway, her coffee cup sat in the sink, her hair tie was around the bathroom faucet, and every tiny trace of her made me feel like I had been living with a stranger who had been measuring my life for weak spots. I locked the door, then locked it again, even though I knew the copied key no longer mattered because Mr. Peterson had already promised to send someone that afternoon. Then I walked across the street to get Lily. Mrs. Alvarez opened the door before I knocked, and Lily ran into my arms so hard I nearly lost my balance, wrapping herself around me like she had been holding her breath all morning. "Is she gone?" Lily whispered into my coat. I closed my eyes and held my daughter tighter. "Yes," I said. "She's gone." But when we stepped back into our house 10 minutes later, Lily stopped in the entryway, looked toward the guest room, and her whole body stiffened. "What is it?" I asked. She pointed to the hallway wall, where one of her drawings had always hung in a little white frame. The frame was still there. The drawing was gone. In its place was a folded note, taped neatly behind the glass, as if Megan had left it there knowing Lily would be the first one to notice. My hands shook as I pulled it out. There were only 6 words written across the page. "You never should have trusted me." The note was only 6 words long, but it felt heavier than anything Megan had stolen, because money could be tracked, jewelry could be photographed, locks could be changed, and credit cards could be canceled. But that little sentence, taped behind my daughter's drawing like a secret waiting to hurt us, proved she had been thinking about the damage before I even understood there was damage. "You never should have trusted me." I stood in the hallway with the paper trembling between my fingers, and Lily stood beside me without saying anything, because even at 9 years old she understood that some sentences are not meant to explain, they are meant to punish. I wanted to tear it up immediately. I wanted to throw it away, scrub the wall, open every window, and pretend that removing her handwriting from the house would remove the fear too. But instead, I folded the note carefully, placed it inside a plastic sandwich bag from the kitchen drawer, and set it beside the screenshots, the bank statements, the photographs, the forged document, the copied key, and the earrings that now felt less like memories and more like evidence. That was the strangest part of that day. My life, which had once been school lunches, laundry baskets, clinic schedules, and bedtime stories, had turned into a case file on my own kitchen table. Lily watched me gathering everything, and the look on her face made my chest hurt, because children should not have to see their mothers learning how to prove that something bad really happened. I knelt in front of her, held both of her hands, and told her that Megan was gone, that she was not allowed back inside, and that none of this had happened because Lily said too much, too little, or anything wrong. Her eyes filled with tears then. "She told me you would be mad if I upset you," Lily whispered, and the shame that moved through me was so sharp I had to look down for a second before I could answer. I had been so focused on Megan stealing from my wallet that I had not fully seen how quietly she had been stealing from my daughter's voice. "She was wrong," I said, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. "You never have to protect me from the truth." That evening, after the locksmith changed both doors and Mr. Peterson added a chain lock without charging me, I walked through every room with a trash bag, collecting the things Megan had left behind. A cracked compact in the bathroom drawer. A pair of earrings that were not mine. Receipts stuffed under the guest bed. A hoodie that smelled like her perfume. A cheap phone charger plugged behind the nightstand. At first, it felt like cleaning. Then I found the envelope. It was tucked under the mattress in the guest room, pressed flat between the box spring and the wooden frame, and when I pulled it out, I expected maybe more receipts, maybe cash, maybe one of my missing papers. Instead, I found copies. Copies of my pay stubs. Copies of my divorce papers. Copies of Lily's school emergency contact form. And at the very bottom, a printed page from the county court website about modifying child custody agreements. I sat down on the floor so suddenly that the bed frame hit my shoulder, and for a moment I could not hear anything except my own breathing. This had not been impulsive. This had not been a sad woman panicking because she had nowhere to go. Megan had been building a folder on me while eating dinner at my table, while braiding Lily's hair, while telling me I was the only person who really understood her. I called Denise first, not because she could fix anything, but because I needed to hear a sane voice before my fear convinced me to minimize it again. She listened without interrupting, then said, "Claire, take photos of everything before you move it, and call the officer who gave you his card." So I did. My hand shook, but I took the photos. The mattress lifted. The envelope half hidden. The documents spread across the carpet. The court website printout with a line highlighted in yellow. When the officer came back later that night, Lily stayed with Mrs. Alvarez again, and I gave him everything I had found, watching his expression change just enough to tell me he no longer saw this as a messy friendship dispute. He asked whether Megan had ever used my computer. I said yes. He asked whether she had access to my printer. I said yes. Then he asked whether anyone else had known where I kept the file box with my divorce papers. I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped. Because Jason had known. Of course Jason had known. That file box used to sit in our old bedroom closet before the divorce, and even though I had moved it twice since then, Megan would not have known what to search for unless someone had told her what mattered. That realization did not feel like anger at first. It felt like ice spreading under my ribs. The officer said he could not promise anything yet, but he told me to document every contact, avoid direct communication with both Megan and Jason, and speak with an attorney about protecting myself before Jason tried to turn the situation around. The next morning, I called a family lawyer from the parking lot of the clinic, using a number Denise gave me from a friend of hers, and I cried before I even finished explaining why I needed help. The lawyer, a woman named Karen Mills, did not sound shocked, which somehow comforted and terrified me at the same time. She told me to send every screenshot, every report number, every bank statement, every photo, every text, and every document Megan had copied, because if Jason attempted an emergency custody claim, we needed to be ready before his version of the story reached a judge first. That sentence stayed with me all day. Before his version of the story reached a judge first. I kept thinking about how many times in my life I had waited to defend myself because I believed the truth would naturally rise to the surface, as if truth were a bird that always found a window. But truth does not always rise by itself. Sometimes it gets buried under confident lies, fake concern, soft voices, and people who know exactly how to look calm while setting your life on fire. For 3 days, I heard nothing from Megan. No calls, no texts, no dramatic voicemail, no apology. That silence should have felt peaceful, but instead it felt like standing in the middle of the road after seeing headlights disappear around a corner, knowing the car might still turn back. Jason texted once, but I did not answer. He wrote, "We need to talk about Lily before this gets worse." I sent the screenshot to Karen and deleted the conversation from my screen without deleting the evidence, because that was my new rule. Do not respond to bait. Save everything. Protect the child first. By Friday, I had frozen my credit, disputed the charges, changed every password, removed Megan from Lily's school pickup list, warned the front office with a photo, and told my neighbor, my supervisor, and 2 close coworkers enough of the truth that secrecy no longer belonged to Megan. And that mattered. Because toxic people grow stronger in private. They need your embarrassment. They need your silence. They need you to keep saying, "It's complicated," while they sharpen the next lie. On Saturday morning, Lily and I finally tried to make the house feel like ours again. We washed the guest room sheets twice, opened the windows, moved the bed to the opposite wall, and turned the room into a little art space for her, with a folding table, markers, and the white frame where her drawing had been before Megan replaced it with that cruel note. For the first time in days, Lily smiled. It was small, careful, and tired, but it was real. Then the doorbell rang. My whole body reacted before my mind did. I checked the camera on my phone, expecting Megan, expecting Jason, expecting some new performance on my porch. But it was a woman I had never seen before, maybe early 30s, standing with a toddler on her hip and a manila folder pressed against her chest. I opened the door with the chain still locked. She looked exhausted. Not dangerous. Not dramatic. Just scared in a way I recognized immediately. "Are you Claire?" she asked. I did not answer right away. Her eyes filled with tears, and she lowered her voice. "My name is Rachel," she said. "Megan stayed with me last year." My stomach dropped. Then she held up the folder with shaking hands. "And I think you need to see what she did before she came to you." I stood behind the chain door, staring at Rachel's tired face and the folder shaking against her chest, and for one awful second I felt the same shame I had felt every time I discovered something new about Megan. Because some part of me still wanted to believe I had been uniquely foolish instead of simply targeted by someone who had done this before. Rachel must have seen the hesitation in my eyes, because she adjusted the toddler on her hip, glanced once toward the driveway like she was afraid someone had followed her, and said, "Please, I know how this sounds, but she almost cost me my apartment, my job, and my custody arrangement with my son." That last part unlocked the door faster than anything else could have. I let her in, but I kept Lily in the art room with her headphones on and Mrs. Alvarez came over within 5 minutes because I had learned, finally and painfully, that private conversations with desperate strangers were not something I owed anyone anymore. Rachel sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Megan had cried into my napkins and called me the only person who understood her, and she opened the folder with hands that looked too young to have carried so much damage. Inside were printed messages, bank statements, police notes, screenshots, and a photograph of Megan standing beside Rachel at what looked like a backyard birthday party, smiling with the same bright warmth she had used on me the night she asked for, just one night. Rachel told me that Megan had moved in with her after claiming her sister had thrown her out, that she had started with small favors, borrowed clothes, unpaid groceries, and emotional breakdowns at exactly the moments Rachel tried to set boundaries. And that within 2 months, she had inserted herself into Rachel's life so deeply that even Rachel's daycare provider thought Megan was family. The story felt so familiar that my skin prickled. Different city, different house, different child. Same script. Rachel said Megan had copied her car key, used her debit card for small purchases, told neighbors that Rachel was overwhelmed and unstable, and then contacted Rachel's ex, a man she had met only once, pretending she was worried about the child's safety. I felt Mrs. Alvarez's hand settle gently on my shoulder, and that touch kept me from folding into myself, because hearing my own nightmare come out of another woman's mouth made everything feel both more real and more unbearable. She knows how to pick women who are trying to rebuild, Rachel said, wiping under one eye with the heel of her hand. Single moms, divorced women, women with bills, women who are tired enough to confuse relief with trust. I looked toward the hallway, where Lily's markers were scattered across the little folding table we had just set up, and my throat tightened because Rachel had said the thing I had been too ashamed to say. Megan had not found me because I was stupid. She had found me because I was lonely, responsible, exhausted, and still kind enough to believe that pain deserved shelter. Rachel pushed one final document across the table. It was a copy of a civil complaint she had filed but later dropped because Megan disappeared before anything could move forward, and Rachel, worn down by work, parenting, and fear, could not afford the attorney hours it would take to chase a woman who had already moved on to the next life she planned to invade. At the bottom of the last page was a name I did not expect. Jason Whitman, my ex-husband. Not as a defendant. Not as a witness. As a contact listed in one of Megan's messages from the year before. For a moment, the room seemed to narrow around that name, and all the air left my lungs so completely that Mrs. Alvarez asked if I needed to sit down, even though I was already sitting. Rachel leaned closer, her face going pale as she understood what I had seen. "You know him?" she asked. I could barely speak. "That's my ex-husband." The silence after that was thick and terrible, because the story I had been telling myself still had one small mercy left inside it, which was the belief that Jason and Megan had only recently connected, only recently started plotting, only recently decided my life could be useful to them. But if his name was already in Rachel's file from a year earlier, then Megan had not simply stumbled back into my life. She had been sent toward it, or guided, or at least pointed in my direction by someone who knew exactly where my doors were weakest. Rachel covered her mouth with one hand, and I saw fear move across her face, not fear of Megan anymore, but fear of what kind of man would connect a predator to the mother of his own child. I called Karen immediately, and when I sent her the photos from Rachel's folder, she told me in a voice so controlled it frightened me that I needed to bring everything to her office Monday morning and avoid any conversation with Jason that was not documented in writing. That weekend, I did not rest. I photographed Rachel's documents, copied every message, wrote down every date I could remember, and built a timeline from the first day Megan contacted me to the morning Jason walked into my house with that copied key. While Lily slept with her bedroom door open and a night light glowing in the hall like we were both afraid of the dark again. By Sunday night, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Megan had contacted me 3 days after Jason learned through our parenting app that I had received a small raise at the clinic. She had asked to stay over 2 weeks after Jason complained that he was behind on child support. She had started talking about my instability right after I refused to lend Jason money for his truck payment. And the forged occupancy form had been filed one day after Jason texted, "You always think you can control everything." It was not proof of everything, not yet, but it was enough to show the shape of the trap. On Monday morning, Karen's office smelled like coffee, paper, and expensive calm, and I sat across from her while she read through the file without interrupting, her pen moving across a yellow legal pad in sharp little strokes that made me feel, for the first time, like someone trained was helping me carry the weight. She said we would request an emergency protective order regarding Megan's contact with Lily, notify the court about Jason's involvement, and file documentation showing a pattern of coercion, unauthorized access, financial misconduct, and attempted manipulation around custody. The words sounded cold, legal, almost lifeless. But beneath them was something I had not felt in weeks. A wall. Not a perfect wall, maybe not an unbreakable one, but a wall between my daughter and the people who thought my fear made me easy to move. That afternoon, Jason finally called instead of texting, and my phone buzzed on Karen's desk while his name flashed across the screen like a bad memory refusing to stay buried. Karen looked at me and said, "Let it go to voicemail." So I did. His message came through 1 minute later, calm at first, then tighter, then angry in the way he used to get when his charm stopped working. "Claire, you're blowing this up for no reason," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Megan is upset. She feels attacked, and if you keep making accusations, I promise the court is going to hear about how paranoid you've become." Karen played it twice. Then she saved it. I expected fear to rise again, but what came instead was something slower and stronger, because Jason had finally made the mistake that people like him always make when they forget you are no longer listening alone. He put the threat in his own voice. 3 days later, we were in a small family court hearing room with beige walls, fluorescent lights, and a judge who looked tired before anyone even spoke, and Jason sat across from me in a navy jacket, looking polished, reasonable, and offended by the inconvenience of being exposed. Megan was not there. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. The judge reviewed the filings. Karen spoke clearly. Jason's attorney tried to make everything sound like a misunderstanding between emotional adults, and then Karen submitted the voicemail, the forged form, the copied key report, Rachel's statement, the messages to Jason, and the photo Megan had taken of Lily outside school. For the first time, Jason did not look calm. He looked trapped. When the judge asked him how Megan had obtained information from my divorce documents, Jason said he had no idea, but his eyes moved down before the sentence was finished. And I saw the same tiny crack I had seen in Megan when the officers found my mother's earrings. The hearing ended with temporary orders that barred Megan from contacting Lily, restricted Jason's pickups to supervised exchanges, and required all communication to stay inside the parenting app until the investigation and custody review were complete. It was not a movie ending. No one was dragged away. No one confessed. No thunder rolled over the courthouse. But when I walked outside into the cold afternoon air, holding Lily's hand while Karen spoke quietly beside me, I felt something inside me step back from the edge. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. No greeting. No apology. Just a photo of my front porch taken from across the street, sometime before the locks were changed. Under it, Megan had written, "You think this is over because a judge said so?" I stared at Megan's message in the courthouse parking lot while Lily's small hand rested inside mine, and for a few seconds the whole world seemed to narrow down to that photograph of my front porch, because even after the judge's order, even after the police reports, even after Rachel's statement and Jason's cracking performance, Megan still wanted me to believe she could reach through any locked door and turn safety into a joke. Karen took the phone from me before I could answer, and that small action probably saved me from doing exactly what Megan wanted, because women like her do not always need access to your house when they still have access to your nervous system. "She wants a reaction," Karen said quietly, forwarding the message to her office and then to the officer assigned to the report. Do not give her one. I nodded, but inside I was shaking so badly that even my teeth felt unsteady, because I had spent weeks telling myself everything would be okay once Megan was gone. And now I understood that getting a toxic person out of your home is not the same as getting them out of your life. For the next 10 days, my world became painfully small. I drove Lily to school and walked her inside. I checked the locks twice every night. I parked under the brightest light at the clinic. I stopped posting anything online. I kept my phone charged, my documents copied, and my fear folded neatly behind a calm face, because I could not afford to fall apart in front of my daughter anymore. Megan sent 3 more messages from unknown numbers. One said, "You always needed people to feel sorry for you." One said, "Jason knows the real you." The last one came at 11:46 on a Thursday night, while Lily slept and rain tapped softly against the kitchen window. It said, "Ask Rachel what happened after she thought she won." That was the message that finally connected the last piece. I called Rachel the next morning, and when I read it to her, she went silent in a way that told me the fear was not old for her either. It was only quieter. Then she told me something she had been too embarrassed to put in the folder. After Megan left her apartment, Rachel had started receiving calls from landlords, daycare administrators, and even her manager, all asking about strange emails that accused her of being unstable, dishonest, and unsafe around her own child. Nothing was signed by Megan. Nothing was easy to prove. But every email used details only Megan could have known. "That is what she does when she loses control," Rachel said, her voice shaking. "She tries to ruin the room after she is kicked out of it." I looked at the kitchen table, where Lily's cereal bowl still sat beside her math homework, and for the first time in this whole nightmare, my fear did not freeze me. It moved me. I called Karen, then Denise, then Lily's school, then my landlord, then the clinic's HR office, and I did the thing I should have done the moment Megan first made me feel afraid. I warned people before she could charm them. I gave names, dates, copies, police report numbers, screenshots, and clear instructions that no information about me or Lily should be shared with anyone claiming to be a friend, relative, advocate, witness, or concerned party. It felt humiliating at first, like I was standing in public holding up the messiest parts of my life. But shame loses power when you stop letting it guard the door for people who hurt you. 2 days later, Megan tried exactly what Rachel said she would. Denise called me into her office on Monday morning with her lips pressed tight, and on her desk was a printed email from a fake account claiming I had been stealing medication from the clinic, neglecting my daughter, and harassing a homeless woman I had forced onto the street. A month earlier, that email might have destroyed me. I would have cried, over-explained, apologized for the inconvenience, and prayed people believed me. But Denise had already seen the police report, Karen had already sent notice to HR, and the clinic's security footage showed Megan sitting in my car during one of the dates mentioned in the accusation. Because she had been waiting for me outside work before everything exploded. For once, the lie arrived late. And because it arrived late, it had nowhere to grow. That afternoon, police contacted Megan about violating the protective order and continuing harassment, and while I do not know exactly what she said, I know the messages stopped after that. Jason's messages changed too. He stopped sounding calm. Then he stopped sounding angry. Then he stopped sounding like a man who still believed the room belonged to him. At the next custody review, his attorney asked for a delay, but Karen came prepared with a fake email, the voicemail, the forged document, the copied key report, Rachel's statement, and the record of Megan's continued contact after the court order. The judge did not look tired that day. She looked irritated. Jason was ordered to continue supervised exchanges. All communication remained restricted to the parenting app, and the court warned him that any further coordination with Megan, direct or indirect, would weigh heavily against him. It was not revenge. It was protection. And protection, I learned, does not always feel triumphant, because sometimes it feels like paperwork, exhaustion, shaking hands, and answering the same painful questions until the truth finally has enough weight to stand. By spring, the house began to feel like ours again. Not all at once. Not in some beautiful scene with sunlight pouring through every window. It happened slowly, in ordinary moments that would have seemed boring before Megan taught me how precious boring could be. Lily taped a new drawing into the white frame in the hallway. This one of our little house with a giant purple lock on the door and two stick figures standing beside it, smiling under a yellow sun that looked too big for the page. I'd changed the guest room completely. No bed. No suitcase corner. No trace of temporary people who arrived carrying emergencies and left carrying pieces of you. Just Lily's art table, a bookshelf, a soft green rug, and a rule I wrote on a sticky note inside my own mind. No one moves into my life faster than trust can prove itself. Rachel and I stayed in touch for a while, not in a dramatic way, not like instant best friends bonded by disaster, but in the careful way two women check on each other after surviving the same kind of storm. She once told me she still felt stupid for letting Megan in. I told her I did too. Then we both went quiet because we knew the truth was more complicated than that. Kindness was not the mistake. Loneliness was not the mistake. Wanting to help someone was not the mistake. The mistake was ignoring the small alarms because I wanted to believe love, friendship, and compassion required me to keep proving myself to someone who kept taking more. Months later, after the final custody review gave me stronger protections and required Jason to complete counseling before unsupervised parenting time could even be reconsidered, I sat alone on the back porch with a cup of coffee and my mother's pearl earrings in my palm. I had not worn them since the morning they fell from Megan's pocket. For a long time, they felt contaminated by what happened. But that evening, with Lily laughing inside the house while a cartoon played too loudly in the living room, I fastened them carefully in my ears and looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. I did not see the woman who let Megan in. I saw the woman who got her out. That difference matters. Because sometimes the lesson is not that you should have known better from the beginning, since people like Megan survive by making themselves look like someone your heart already understands. Sometimes the lesson is that the first red flag is not there to be explained away. It is there to be respected. And when someone makes you feel guilty for protecting your peace, your child, your money, your privacy, or your home, they are not asking for love. They're asking for access. The last time I heard from Megan was through Rachel, who sent me a short message almost a year later saying Megan had been arrested in another county after using a stolen card and giving police a fake name. I wish I could say that news made me happy. It did not. It only made me quiet. Because by then I understood that people like Megan do not stop because one person finally sees them clearly. They stop only when enough people stop opening doors for them. Sometimes, when Lily and I drive past the diner where Megan cried into that napkin and called me the only person who really saw her, I still feel a strange heaviness in my chest. Not grief exactly. Not anger either. More like the shadow of the woman I used to be, the one who thought being good meant being available, being kind meant being unprotected, and being loved meant never making anyone uncomfortable. I am not that woman anymore. I still help people. I still believe in friendship. I still believe broken people deserve compassion. But now I know compassion without boundaries is not kindness. It is an unlocked door. And I will never again confuse someone needing a place to stay with someone deserving a place in my life.